is actually a really fascinating episode to me. If I was in charge, I probably would have done things slightly differently, but at the same time, I can see why they did them the way they did. See, here's what I would have done differently. It would take some real thinking out to figure out the specifics of how to pull this off. But what I would want to do is never show our side of the story. Only show the ISN report. Make that the entire episode, the ISN episode. They've kind of done this before, actually, A Day in the Strife. But I think that would have really helped to cap this, and then have the only scene that's actually, off camera, so to speak, be the scene right at the very end, because that was perfection. But I'll get to that in a minute. Now you might ask, well, why? What's the point of that? Two reasons. First of all, to us, it is so obvious what they're doing and how they're lying and how they're twisting things, because we've seen the whole picture. We see everything that's going on. We saw what they were recording and how they were recording it, and then how they twisted that to their particular ends. So there's no mystery or anything like that. It would have been interesting, in my opinion, to have it instead be where we see only their side of the story, so we have to deduce the truth from their lies. Now, I know what you're going to say. Oh, they're not lying. Well, I mean, they are lying, but this is one of the reasons why I call it a deception role when it comes to my D&D pen and paper campaigns. Because it doesn't matter if you are telling a lie or the truth. What matters is if you are trying to deceive. The illusion of truth is a fantastic name for this episode, and applies in so many different ways that I don't even feel the need to discuss it. I mean, I think you can pick that up on your own. But let me go ahead and just kind of start going down the list here. I've got a lot of thoughts all over the place, so hopefully these will make some sense in conjunction. Once again, I wish I could just have the episode up behind me here and talk about it as I go, kind of lore run it. Copy wrong, be damned. The first thought I had was the irony of a military man at peace. It is a paradox in its own way. It's a conundrum. I've seen this before in real life, actually. Someone who is a strong military individual, male or female, who obviously is more comfortable with and better suited to a military situation. War or skirmishes or, preparation, something to do with military action. The reason I find that amusing, though, I shouldn't say amusing, interesting, the reason I call that a paradox is because most of those people also desire peace, are actively seeking peace, even. And yet they are very uncomfortable with the peace they tend to create. Of all places, this is actually touched on in Dragon Age Origins by Oghren, where he talked about how many of the most skilled and armed and powerful and greatest warriors of the great Orzammar kingdom were trained so hard and so viciously and had to go through so much hell fighting the Darkspawn that when they finally got home, it wasn't home for them. And of course, since a lot of this tends to go back to a lot of real life war experience stuff, which I'm actually not going to talk about, but it's a common concept, and I find it fascinating. This episode does two things that are very, I don't want to use the word subtle, because they're actually overt, but they're very brutal, I think is the word I want to use here. First of all, the revenue hit. I actually talked last episode, I think it was last episode. It's been a week for me. I had to take a break to get some other recording done. But I talked recently about the idea that Clark going after them by hitting their pocketbook was a very smart idea. And we're already seeing the beginnings of that. Babylon 5 had finally started hitting the black, and now they're going to start dipping into the red again, because the loss of revenue just from Earth is sufficient and significant enough to really hit them in a bad way. Even though, as Ivanova points out, they still have all of the normal revenue and normal traffic from other alien races. Then there's the threat, the implied threat to the families. Ivanova says something that actually made me cringe a little bit. I don't mean like it was a bad line or a bad reading. She said, they wouldn't go after your father. He was too important of a diplomat to just disappear, or an ambassador. I forget if it was an ambassador or diplomat. But, he's too important of a figure to just disappear. Never say that. Never say, insert evil government here would never go this far. I mean, this step is just too much, right? Yeah. Zach does some good stuff with regards to taking over after Garibaldi. You can see he's basically following in Garibaldi's overall footsteps, even if he doesn't quite have Garibaldi's mind. In fact, it's funny because I have a weird feeling that Zach is basically trying to emulate Garibaldi, but he doesn't remember that Garibaldi isn't just the hard ass who, Chkong. Garibaldi's the detective, the guy who puts two and two together very quickly and very easily and very smoothly. And we'll talk more about that in just a second. But I do want to say... Actually, you know what? Why don't we talk about that now? Because then we'll segue a little bit. Detective Garibaldi has clearly not lost his touch. The way he interacts with the random guy who wants this, this statue back. The fact that he so quickly puts together the pieces of what's actually happening. The fact that he quickly deduces everything. That's very Garibaldi, and that's the other half of Garibaldi, in addition to the Zach half. I bring this up not just because it's nice to see Detective Garibaldi in action, but it means his detecting skills, his analytical mind, if you will, his ability to look at complex facts, is still intact. Which is kind of weird when you think about it. Now, I have one other thing to say about Garibaldi. Two things, actually. These are kind of spread out throughout the episode. First of all, we obviously, clearly and demonstrably know something's wrong with Garibaldi. In fact, we're pretty sure at this point, from a third-person perspective, knowing everything that the characters don't, that he's being brainwashed. I mean, we flat out saw the control screen, right? Why, It's interesting that he still has some of his faculties while he's being controlled. But that brings me to my next 3 points. First of all, we would know, even if we hadn't seen the control scene, even if we didn't keep getting the flashbacks, we would know Garibaldi was being controlled because he hasn't been acting like himself, and he's been deliberately obfuscating. He gives a speech in his interview about how Sheridan has this messianic complex. Now, Sheridan probably does have a little bit of that going on, given what he's gone through and what he is going through. And the knowledge that you only have 20 years left kind of makes you want to do things now, But the reason I bring that up is that's not Garibaldi. We have seen Garibaldi. We've established him many times over the last 3 years. We know what kind of person he is. He's not the kind of person to go behind someone who is both his friend and was his CEO's back. And pretty much deliberately slant information against him like that. That's just... I don't even know how to say it. That is not Garibaldi. That is not how he thinks. That is not how he feels. Even if he did actually harbor such thoughts, he would never voice them, especially not to a reporter. And he would never slant his word choice to make it so clear that he was buying into some kind of program or whatever. In other words, that he was basically saying exactly what they wanted to hear. Unedited, by the way. You notice that's one of the only interviews they did in the whole bunch that was unedited. So that was just Garibaldi talking there. In addition to that, there's also the fact that, I mean, Lord knows Garibaldi doesn't trust anybody. And yet he's willing to open up to this reporter? I mean, I could buy Garibaldi not trusting Sheridan right now. In fact, to be honest, I could kind of see where he's coming from on that. But to just blab about that on a frickin' TV because someone's got to let people know? Really? Second point about Garibaldi, or I'll whip to third now, I don't remember. The flashbacks he keeps seeing. This is actually more important than you might think, and I'm really curious about this. Because is Garibaldi seeing those same flashbacks we're seeing or not? If he is not seeing those same flashbacks, then what's probably happening is he's just getting a vague sense of unease or disorientation as he's trying to collect his thoughts and his brain is dealing with being bombarded by brainwashing and whatnot, right? But I find it more interesting that he is seeing the flashbacks, because that then brings up a much more horrific question. If he is seeing those flashbacks of him being programmed, can he do anything about it? Is he a prisoner in his own mind, in other words? Yeah. By the way, we do know they have access to things like death of personality. You remember that, right? I'll be bringing that up again in a second. So let's talk about the reporters. They pull off all the typical, classic even, reporter tricks. In fact, if anything, I feel like the reporter actor they got, I can't remember his name, laid it on a little too thick. It was so obvious. Now, granted, I've actually done television reporting just for a local city, nothing big. But, I have done that, and they tell you, they teach you all these tricks, and it was kind of repugnant, actually. It's one of the reasons I stopped doing that and started shifting over to the editing side of things. And then I shifted out of that when I noticed the problem wasn't going away. What? But seriously, though, it's a messed up situation. I'm sorry, I'll be right back. Okay, never mind. We're good. I thought the stupid dog needed to be let up. Okay, so first of all, the trick with the camera was almost too obvious. We refuse to let you search us. We have rights. Now, that's deliberately a statement you give to provoke someone, a provocative statement, if you will. Aha, we have rights, you can't do this. Pretty much designed to push Zach over the edge in order to push the issue, which, of course, he did, then giving them their wonderful footage. Do keep in mind that if the response had been more measured, if Zach had not gone with the emotional route, he still would have won that engagement, because they don't have any rights like that. This is a neutral military installation. Certain equipment gets not allowed. That's how that works. You don't have a right to privacy on a military station. You don't have the right to not be searched on a military outpost. It doesn't work that way. So if he had just been like, all right, stay put, here's the legalese, here's the legal right, blah, 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 so you're being issued warrant, blah, 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 for the search of your stuff, here's the paperwork, search the stuff, hey, it's camera crew stuff. I want to talk about something before we go into more of what the reporter does. First of all, I've been talking about this for some time. Sheridan is very honest. It's almost a character flaw. It kind of is a character flaw. And he's got... that honesty is part of what pushes him to be who he is and what he is. And I do like that about his character. But he is very honest throughout pretty much this entire episode. I like his little rejoinder where Ivanova is threatening the reporter and he says, no, we're low on resources. You need to strip him naked and then toss him out the airlock. Because he hates reporters in general. And I can kind of see where he's coming from on that. Even a reporter who isn't working for a dictator fascist regime of doom is still someone who's probably going to rub someone like Sheridan the wrong way, since slanting news and only reporting certain types of news is still a reporter's job, even if they're not under dictatorial control. Again, speaking from experience on that one. So, I could see why Sheridan would take that kind of a stance. But I also love how he tries to use his military tactics on the situation, and it utterly fails him. I'm going to be building up to this point, but I want to say this here because Sheridan flat out admits his real honest reasoning for allowing them to do the thing. They're going to take a stab at us no matter what. Let's see what they've got. Now, there's actually a term for that kind of military maneuver, and I can't remember it. It's basically a scouting party. What does the enemy have? You want to provoke your enemy to attack you so you know what they've got in the wings and what they're hitting you with. Gives you an idea of what to expect for future engagements, right? The problem is that only works when you're fighting an enemy who you can... I mean, I shouldn't say this. It is a valid strategy, even in this case. The problem is, my personal opinion, I think he really messed up on this one. I don't think this is spoiling anything, because I would speculate on this even if I didn't know how the rest of the season goes. But what he has just done by allowing them to take their potshots at him, by seeing what they've got in the ammo cartridges, is he now has a much harder job about going back after Earth in the future. Before, the possibility of him bringing in his allies in the non-aligned worlds was on the table. Now, with the whole puppet thing, because of the appearances, if Sheridan comes back to usurp Clark with an alien fleet, what do you think people are going to think about that? That's why I say this doesn't quite apply here, because this isn't a war in the classic sense of the word. And that, of course, is something I'll talk about more in a minute. So, the reporter says something funny. He says there's no such thing as an objective reporter. That's true. There's no such thing as an objective anybody. We all have bias to some extent or another. We may take effort to be less biased, and many of us do, but we're all still biased at the end of the day. And acknowledging that is one of the true, in my opinion, points that needs to be done in order to try and get closer to actual truth. We'll never actually reach it, but at least we'll get closer, right? excuse me, then he says, a little truth is better than none. You remember what I said earlier about the difference between lying and deceiving? In my experience, a little truth is actually much, much worse than no truth. In a no truth situation, you're just making stuff up, which may or may not conform to anything actually happening. In a little truth situation, oh, well, now we've got something to add to the pot. And I'm just mixing my metaphors all over the place here, so forgive me. But then, the reporter flat out, again, he's laying it on thick, he's being a sleazeball, but then he flat out threatens them. You can either help us do the story, or we'll do the story without you. And it'll be worse for you. Kind of reminds me of Londo's situation, actually. They also show a lot of every now and again, they just show the camera doing, taking, it's not literally taking pictures, but they just show all the moments. Basically, this episode feels like a how-to book for anybody who needs to do biased journalism. And I mean that with total sincerity. I don't recommend you do it, by the way. It's a kind of a soul-sucking situation, again, as I've already referenced before. But really, they do all the typical tricks. I wrote down a couple of them. First of all, the camera annoyance trick. Now, they didn't actually follow through on that one. I was a little surprised by that. But you'd be amazed how easy it is to make someone look angry or annoyed or antagonistic for a shot or for an interview by just setting things up just right. Now, we, of course, don't have floating cameras, but you can put the camera right up in their face, or you can have someone, make them uncomfortable, or you can view them. This is one of the first tricks I learned about this, actually. You have it so that the sun is at your back, looking straight into their eyes, so they're doing this while they're talking to you. And it tends to make, especially if you edit it just right in the back and forth, it tends to make them look a lot more, put them in a more negative light. No pun intended. Then, of course, there's the asking misleading questions. Now, everyone knows this one. I think Family Guy probably did the most absurd example of this, but I've actually heard close to this. Basically, when trying to establish, I forget the exact example in Family Guy, so I'm just going to make this up. Here's this person. This person is innocent. However, you ask the question like this. Is this person a raving drunk or a secret alien from Mars? Which of these statements is more true? Now, that is an extreme example, but that is what a misleading question is. Basically, it's asking the wrong question designed to provoke the wrong answer, in order to get an answer that, even if they try to say, well, yeah, but we as human beings, especially over the last 40 years or so, have basically gotten to the point now where if someone answers a question, yes, however, or yes, but, and tries to segue something like that, we automatically, our opinion of that answer goes down a bit, like, oh, they're hiding something now, or oh, they're trying to slant things. And it's a little more difficult to recognize the initial slant of the way the question was stipulated. Now, this ties in beautifully with the third trick. Asking a question, getting the wrong answer, which is slanted, as I just mentioned, and then editing in a completely different question. They actually do this trick blatantly. It's so obvious. I'm amazed no one noticed this. If you don't understand what I mean, let me put it to you this way. Let me show you reality. Here's reporter, interviewer, and here's the reportee, the interviewee. Okay, reporter's like, hey, what do you think about baseball? I love it. Oh God, it's the best thing ever. Okay, that's what happened in reality. Now we go back. We have him. We get a completely separate shot. Ideally in the same position, same chair, same everything, but the interviewee is gone now. So we just switch the camera over here and take a shot of him asking the question, what do you think of the Clark administration? Then we edit those two shots together. What do you think of the Clark administration? Oh, it's great, I love it, I can't get enough of it. Yeah. Also, smile, smile! God, I wanted to stab her. So much fake smiling. It was like poison. We also see a couple of things that the Clark administration is doing before we actually get to the news program's presentation. First of all, we see one of the tricks that they like to use, that has been used in real life, actually, to control or dominate someone, whether on a personal level or on a a group level or on an organization level or a national level or whatever, national level, we're taking away, chocolate rations. Chocolate is a needed resource for blah, 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 blah. Oh, things have been going well. We've decided for today only, everyone can get one chocolate bar as a reward of good service. It's disguising returning something to you as a reward for good service, or as a way to show, like, things are going well. They do this with the curfew. Today, everyone can have 2 additional hours of curfew. Yay! Then, they show the interview. Unedited. That is actually an interesting point. But they show the unedited interview of the guy confessing. I just like to give praise to whoever directed that scene and the actor who actually played the guy confessing, because he perfectly portrayed someone who was being coerced into making a false confession. Because that's exactly what was happening. And then, this is where things get kind of horrifying for me, cuts back to Smile, Smile, lady, and she says, don't worry, he will not be imprisoned for his crimes. He will be sent to a psychiatric facility for his crimes in order to be rehabilitated and blah, blah, blah. You remember the Clark administration has access to the death of personality, right? You remember that it could literally reprogram your brain to turn you into whoever you want it to, right? Yeah. If you'll remember, all the way back in Passing Through Gethsemane, I actually made the comment that of all the many things to be said about the death of personality concept, what ultimately it really boiled down to for me was the idea that someone would have to have access to that power. And do I trust others with that power? And my answer was an adamant no. And thank you, Clark administration, for showcasing why that is. Appreciate the aid. Now, please stop existing. Then we actually get to the news program itself. They do a couple of interesting things. I don't have much else to share, actually. It's all very cut and point. They do a couple of things, though. First of all, they buy credibility. I actually hate this when I see this happening. It's when you spend money to procure someone who has, official documents or official licensing or is a well-known such and such, and therefore, because they're speaking in favor of your thing, you have purchased their credibility. In a recent E3, and by recent I mean I think 2 years ago at this point, they brought Pele into this new EA soccer game. And they just had him sit there and talk about soccer, football, game, soccer, football, whichever, game for a bit. And they just had him talking about it. And then he left. Buy our game. We brought him in. That's buying credibility in a nutshell, and I hate that crap. And I want to make this clear, by the way. There is a difference between buying credibility and bringing in an expert. Because pay attention to how the therapist talks. He is not speaking professionally at all, actually. In fact, if his words were written down in a paper and submitted, it would be rejected in a heartbeat for being incredibly unprofessional, unscientific, and unsubstantiated. It's basically him making wild guesses based off of biased information. And it's not even basically that, it is literally that. He actually flat out says, I would never want to make a diagnosis over long distance, but yes, my diagnosis is... That's the difference between buying credibility and bringing in an expert. They bring in this well-renowned guy to spout off about this made-up syndrome of exalting the Minbari. Let me give you another example of this. I'm bad at this, so I'm going to try my best, so forgive me, but I hope you at least get the concept here. Our children are engaging in horrific and debauches, and unpleasant debauchery. I told you I'm bad at this. Unpleasant debauchery. They are sitting down and reading books that allow them to cast spells and talking about putting people under enchantments and going to far off places, and some of them even adorn themselves with unique iconic runes or clothing that's supposed to enhance their magical power in order to be able to manipulate. Okay, I can't do this anymore. But the point being, how you present information matters so much. I hope I present information well. It's actually something I strive to do. Because you can have the exact same information and present it like that, or in a boring manner, or an entertaining manner, or you can have information presented as, so, some of the kids decided to go ahead and start playing D&D as a way to interact with each other more personally and actually be able to get to know each other and get their friendship moving. They've been going through this module recently, which is pretty cool. One of them's trying to play a caster. He's having issues trying to keep up with the rules, but he's with it because he's having fun. Same information conveyed. Oh, wait, I forgot one. Sorry, I didn't convey the same information. Because I forgot that Bobby, who's in part of that group, has also started, he's actually been showing up in costume a little bit, just, get into the spirit of things and have a little bit more fun of it. They kind of poked fun at first, but, I mean, they're all geeks in there, right? So they all had fun with it. There we go. Same information, completely different presentation. And that is exactly what the therapist is doing. Oh, yes, well, you present information from a slanted perspective and then use the slanted perspective of existing information to skew off into a conclusion. Then you behave as if this conclusion is absolute truth and use this to establish the rest of your argument. And that is exactly what they do. And it's kind of sickening to see such a textbook example of it like that. And then, of course, there's the great irony of it all. The fact that Earth actually is their target. So yes. Oh, real quick, before I forget. Notice they slip in right at the end there a threat. To Sheridan personally. You caught that, right? The comment about how Sheridan's family farm burned to the ground and his father's missing. You did catch that, right? Yeah. That one was messed up. Just slid it under there. And said it as if he was concerned. We're very concerned about him. Hint, hint, we're threatening your family. But no, they'd never do that, right, Ivanova? This is why Clark presents such a different threat to the Shadow. Smaller, weaker, easier to topple, but very different threat. A much more personal threat. A much more political threat. A much more propaganda-y threat, for lack of a better term. There was no problem propagandizing the Shadows. They were the Shadows. If I may, it's kind of like how in real life, we all kind of unified against Nazi Germany, right? Specifically the Nazi regime. I want to make that clear. I know some people still have some stickler issues about that. But just about everyone was like, yeah, they're the bad guys. Done. Clear, unilateral threat that has to be dealt with. That was the Shadows. Clark's a little different. We can't just march up and deal with him. We don't have any back pocket situation. We can't just unify an army to go. We have to deal with him much more carefully and much more precisely. Or to put it another way, the Shadows were a T-Rex charging down on you. Clark's a virus that you have to somehow excise. And while there is no denying the T-Rex is the more difficult of those two contests, the virus is also very, very, very different of an approach, right? And I feel for Sheridan because he is just floundering trying to deal with this new threat. The final scene was absolutely perfect. I was actually thinking in my head. You'll notice as they're giving the broadcast, they aren't cutting back and forth to the actual people watching, Delenn and Sheridan and Ivanova. And there's a lot of ways you could have gone with that. A lot of different things from a directorial and from a writing perspective that you could have the scene cut back to them to showcase their reaction to the show. And I was thinking of the typical thing would be, it's stupid, and but I feel that would take some of the impact away. So getting rid of the dialogue would have been my first choice. But my second choice is actually taking a leaf out of another show, and honestly, I don't remember which show it is, but cut back to them, and it's just a shot of, like, the place being trashed. Stuff has literally been tossed around and thrown around, desk upheaved and all that, and Ivanova is just, and they're just stewing in that I hate you kind of pose. No dialogue, and then cut to black. And that's what I was thinking they would go with, until we saw what they actually go with, which was perfect. Ivanova's furious and just charges off. Sheridan, hands behind his back, military at rest. No sound. Not even no dialogue, just no sound at all. And he's just staring out a window, and Delenn goes over and then walks away. And then Sheridan comes back, turns off the view thing. Yeah. I guess we'll see where this goes, huh, guys? Next week on Babylon 5.